Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing some more Sharks news, as it has been a pretty crazy 48 hours. First, we had the re-signing of Erik Karlsson, 8 years, $11.5 million. Then we had the Sharks trading Justin Braun to the Philadelphia Flyers for a second and third round pick. And now, at the NHL Awards Media Day, of which there's two Sharks attending, Brent Burns for the James Norris and Joe Thornton for the Bill Masterton, Joe Thornton announced in an interview of sorts that he will return for, at the very least, one more season, and as we know, that will likely be with the San Jose Sharks. He even exaggerated a bit, saying that he'd like to even play 5 more seasons. So it seems as though he doesn't look at the possibility that this next one would be his final one, as he maybe plans on taking the Jaromir Jagr route and playing until he really gets phased out of the NHL, sort of like what Jagr did. And so, as we know, it has been sort of common knowledge at this point that Joe Thornton will probably take some sort of, scraps type of contract where he'll get basically what is left of the cap space that the Sharks do have, as long as it's not something like $700,000. Of course, he'd probably like to at least get $1 million, because the Sharks, going into the 17-18 season, once Patrick Marleau left, the Sharks decided to give Joe Thornton an $8 million contract, which of course he wasn't really worth $8 million in that season, as sort of like a front-loaded type of deal that wouldn't hurt the Sharks' cap situation in the future, especially since the Sharks wanted to make a move for Tavares at the end of that season. The Sharks decided to pay Joe Thornton a lot in 1 year so that they could pay him a lot less in the following year. Now, of course, that didn't pan out. They didn't get Tavares for the 11 to maybe even 13 million they were offering him. They ended up getting Karlsson for 6.5. And so once again, they actually had a decent amount of cap space to give to Joe Thornton, and he was signed for $5 million. And so over those 2 years, he made $13 million. If the Sharks give him even just $1 to $2 million this season, that would end up being an average annual value of about $5 million over 3 years, which is a pretty fair contract, all things considered, for a player of his age and the ability he is able to play at this point. And so if Thornton can get that spot onto the third-line center, and we have Labanc, Pavelski, and Meier hopefully to be re-signed, it will only leave that spot on the wing next to Thornton. And we saw Thornton this past season sort of take Kevin Labanc under his wing to try and round him into a more complete player, and we'll see if then Labanc can leave the nest and play in the top 6 next season, and how much success he could possibly have. And with the Sharks probably not having a lot of cap space to actually get an established NHL player to play on that third line, unless they want to move someone like Melker Karlsson if he remains with the squad up to the third line, it might be Joe Thornton mentoring yet another young player, potentially like Ivan Chekovich from juniors, or maybe Sasha Chmelevski from juniors as well. And, if you were going to bring a prospect up into a system, there's probably very few teams you'd want to do it on that, over the Sharks, and especially you'd want to play him on a line with someone like Joe Thornton, who would do a great job at teaching a young player like Chekovich and Chmelevski the ins and outs of not just on the ice, but also off the ice of being an NHL player. So Thornton, again, it's not 100% confirmed. We don't know any sort of contract details, as he hasn't actually signed yet, but he has said multiple times, and most people believe that if he was going to return to the NHL, he would be returning with the San Jose Sharks. So it's all but confirmed Thornton will be back next season, and all that's left is to iron out the details of term, which will likely be 1 year, but of salary. And so I don't know if we're going to get that soon. I suspect salary might actually wait a couple of weeks to just see where all the other cards fall, what Meier ends up signing for, Labanc, Pavelski, which we may only find out July 1st or so. At that point, we'll probably get Joe Thornton to sign, but it's certainly a nice thing to know that he will be back with the Sharks next season. Class dismissed.